Hello and welcome to the author interviews here at Continual. I'm your host, Gail Z. Martin, and today we have Kaela Joseph and Tanya Cook talking about their new book, Fandom Acts of Kindness. And I'm so excited to get into this and talk about the what and the wherefore. But first, let's let Kaela and Tanya introduce themselves, starting with Kaela.
Hi, I'm Kaela Joseph. I'm a psychologist out of the San Francisco Bay Area. I use they and she pronouns, and I co-authored Fandom Acts of Kindness with Tanya.
Very good. Tanya.
Hi, I'm Tanya Cook. I am a sociology professor at the Community College of Aurora, which is near Denver, Colorado. And just to keep it fun and interesting, and also because it reflects my identity, I use she, they pronouns these days. And I co-wrote this book with Kaela, and we are in the middle of working on our second book. So very exciting.
That is very exciting. So what prompted the topic Fandom Acts of Kindness? What made you decide, hey, I want to do a book, I want to do a book together, I want to do a book on this topic? Kaela?
Yeah, so the way that this came about, that we started working together, is we met each other through the Supernatural fandom. And specifically, we met each other because Misha Collins had tweeted out about the very beginnings of Tanya's project, looking at fandoms and social movements. I happened to be getting into fandom research at the time and was really just starting in fandom research, period, and saw this tweet and went, hey, that's what I want to do. Reached out to Tanya and said, is this something that we maybe could do together? And it's really worked nicely with that pairing between me being a psychologist, Tanya being a sociologist. We can approach the social science of it all from slightly different lenses, but a shared middle ground as well.
Okay. Tanya?
Yeah, that's definitely the great summary. Why did I want to write this book, or why did we? One thing I would add to that, we can certainly tell the story in more detail of how Misha made my social media explode and raised the signal enough for Kaela to reach out and find me. And as they said, we are a great Wonder Twins, team up, because Kaela can add all these great clinically based activities or psychologically based activities to the book that I don't necessarily have the professional background in. And I can kind of wax philosophical about Marxism and other theories. Anyway, yeah. And so we came to write this book, though. We had been working on this project of looking at fandom and fan culture and looking at the ways that fans were increasingly becoming like activists and doing what we thought were really social movement style actions, or very close to social movement style actions. And when we started to share our initial results at various conventions, fan conventions and professional conventions, the question that we were asked over and over again at fan spaces was, that's great. I love it. Thanks for the dissertation, professor. How do I do it? Like, tell me how to actually do this work that I find so inspiring. And so we hope this book does at least two things for readers. And one is to get an appreciation for all the amazing things that fans have done and been doing as a part of fandom, and really celebrate the positive ways fans have become the heroes that they want to see in the world. And then two, to be kind of a dungeon master's guide. And that is a very, very intentional nod to D&D for how to kind of forge your own path, create your party, and, become those heroes you want to see and actually do fan activism. And we hope to speak to you wherever you are in that journey. If you're just starting out, if you've been doing this for 20 years, right? If you're somewhere in the middle of that, hopefully you'll find something here that's of use and inspiring.
Okay. Yeah, I've been knocking around fan spaces for more decades than I want to admit. And I've seen people do some pretty amazing things when they've been brought together by the love of a common show or book or movie or fandom, where in real life they might not have met each other at all, or may not have other things in common beyond that, but there's been this forged family. And it's pretty amazing what people can accomplish like that. Give me some examples. I know Gish is certainly a big thing that Misha has done over the last number of years, but there's so much beyond that. So give me some examples of what you're talking about here. Kaela?
Yeah, so we share examples in the book from things that people can do in the comfort of their own home, like sign petitions or get on mailing lists, to starting an organization. So one of the things that we did was interview folks who are behind organizations. So we certainly talked to a lot of people who gish. We also talked to the organizers of an organization called Parasol Patrol that shields kids at anti-LGBTQ plus protests, things like drag story hours and things like that. And so we've seen some really incredible things where folks have started something new, where folks have participated in something that's already existed. We've seen a fan donate an organ to a stranger. That's one of the interviews and examples that we have in the book. And, to that point about when people come together around fandom and around that shared interest, one of the things that we've been talking to folks about at cons recently is that sort of accelerated friendship that you have when oh, this person already shares a lot of my same values and interests. And it's really because of that we see people be able to come together to do these things. Like, I don't know of many other communities where people would donate an organ to a stranger.
Yeah, that's pretty big.
That was, and I'll jump in if it's cool. That was so fun. And I spoke about this earlier today, where we were sitting at our table at Supernatural Con, or whatever, Creation Entertainment, whatever it's called these days, the rebrand, I can't keep up with.
Mhm.
We're sitting at our table, and this young woman walks up to us and says, "I'm in your book." And I thought, yeah, you're in our book. You're a fan, you do good stuff. Yeah, everybody, you're all represented here, right? And she was like, "No, I'm Lauren. I'm on page 35 or whatever." And we realized, oh my God, this is Lauren, the person who randomly saw a call for another Supernatural fan needing a kidney and stepped up. And so she donated a kidney. We gave her a book. I don't think that's a fair exchange, but it was the least we could do. And so stories like that are just so amazing. And she is not the only person to have donated an organ through fandom. It has also happened in the Star Wars fan community and others, I think, as well. And I want to shout out for the Supernatural volunteers who staffed essentially online communities, where they staffed Slack channels and Discord and other social media channels, helping rescue people from flooding after Hurricane Harvey. And that really terrible series of hurricanes we had back to back to back in 2017. And I interviewed quite a few of those folks, and it was just, talk about literally saving people, right? The Supernatural tagline is often saving people, hunting things, the family business. And I don't know about the hunting things, but they made the saving people thing a reality. And they ended up like scrubbing, because a lot of folks in that situation, they couldn't call 911. They couldn't use their phone. Cell lines were out. So they would post on Twitter, or they would tweet, and then they would use hashtags. And these volunteers would monitor those hashtags, and they called it scrubbing, like, following all those hashtags on social media. And then they would connect the people in need of services to the volunteer Navy, the Cajun Navy, who would come through and help them, get out of where they were trapped and get to rescue point. So that was just, talk about mind-boggling what folks did for that.
Yeah, I've seen fandom groups that have helped get people and animals out of places with wildfires, that have helped after flooding, that have chipped in for like food donations, or pretty much any human need you can think of. Over the years, I've seen fans just gather together and do amazing things. And it all just seems to happen when somebody goes, I could do a little. And you get enough people doing a little and it's a lot. What is it about the fan connection that brings this out in people? Because we all are part of many communities. We have work friends, we have neighbors, we may have a house of worship, we have clubs and community organizations. What is it that's so unique about fandom that brings this out in people? Kaela?
Yeah, there's a few things. One seems to be this power of story and story bringing people together in a way that's not just about consuming something. So there is this building of community around shared values, not just I like this thing, but I like this thing and it says something about me and my identity and how I connect with other people. And because of that, there's also this piece around found family. And when folks come together in that more close-knit found family way, it also tends to be folks who maybe don't fit in other places. And so not only is this found family just a great source of support, but it is truly a piece of somebody's identity. And when you care about something on that level and have that shared caring with other people on that level, and you happen to be from marginalized groups that really need the activism and the advocacy, it just kind of creates this like perfect soup of why you might get into activism with your fellow fans.
Okay. Tanya?
I love that you said soup instead of storm, because soup is so much better than a storm. And what do you want after a storm? You want soup. No, jokes aside, I think just to echo what Kaela said, we talk about, and this is where we get a little more theoretical. I talk about the 4 C's of fan activism in the book, and those are collective effervescence. Okay, that's kind of where you go to these events. And this is why we were all kind of bummed out big time during lockdown when we couldn't see each other. That fun feeling you get. I went to the D&D movie recently in person in the theater, and at the end everybody clapped and cheered, and people hollered together, and that's just fundamentally different. That's why you go to those live events, is to have that shared feels, that heightened energy experience. So you take that plus the collective identity piece of fandom that's increasingly, I think, activated among fans, meaning being a fan for us, those of us who are, as one of our interviewees said, not just lowercase f fan, but capital F fans. We show up. We buy the stuff. We buy the Captain America merch. We donate to the things. Like, we show up. And for us, being in a fandom isn't just something we have as a collection. It's something we do. It's an action. So we create fan works, we cosplay, we talk about it, everything from doing a streaming of you playing a game to writing fanfic or creating art that would count in this version of collective identity that we're discussing. Then there is a community and a call to action. Sometimes that call to action comes from a celebrity or a known person in the fandom, somebody we might call a starticipant. That's our word, so you have to cite us if you say it. Just saying, just saying. Okay. You can use it, but give us credit. And then from there's collective action. So that's more of the people kind of showing up and either boycotting something or purchasing something or organizing themselves to, support the Cajun Navy or rescue efforts or what have you. Right. So that's kind of, I think that combined with everything Kaela shared about, really finding your space and finding your group of people who, you can kind of shortcut through all that small talk, awkward phases of relationships and just get right into the heart of it. That's
Mhm.
really important.
Well, and in supernatural fandom, we've certainly seen Jared's Always Keep Fighting campaign and how many things have come from that and within the fandom and outside the fandom because of his willingness as a very visible person to say, "Hey, I'm dealing with this, and it's okay to deal with it. And if you're dealing with this, make sure that you get the help you need. No shame." And that's huge when somebody who is a hero to people reveals that about themselves and makes it possible to have a conversation like that on a very different level, on a very different platform. So, we've talked about some of the big things, we've talked about some of the little things. What are some of the conclusions or observations or surprises that hit you as you were pulling all of this material together? Kaela?
So, one of the things that we tried to focus on that might be a little bit different from other works on activism is the importance of self-care and just how exhausting activism can be. One of the things that we think is amazing about fan activism specifically is that fandom builds in a little bit of fun. And you can do activism in a way that's sustaining just by doing activism that is also fun. And that said, it still can be exhausting. We talked about Gish a little bit earlier. I don't think there's a person among us who's done Gish who hasn't had a moment at 3 o'clock in the morning where you're cursing a bottle of glitter and why are we doing this? So even the fun stuff can be exhausting. And then certainly the stuff that has to do with advocating for things like your personal rights can be especially exhausting. And so having some self-care pieces built into that, how we can use fandom itself as self-care, and then also how we can use even just examples of self-care that we would see in other places, but translating it through fandom. So for example, we talk about mindfulness. We have a whole mindfulness activity in the book that is centered around the Infinity Stones. It's a regular mindfulness activity, but it's done in a way to get people who are excited about geek culture to be able to say like, oh yeah, this is how I can do this. That doesn't just feel like sitting in a room and being quiet with my thoughts.
Okay.
Yeah, I
yeah.
would. Oh, sure. Sorry about that. I would echo that. And I would also say one thing we've been highlighting a lot in our conversations around this is that activism can and should be sustainable and joyful. Like we want folks to set boundaries around what is healthy for them to engage in, what is doable for them. And often, activism or this work or our heroes that we look to in our products are, talk about the Winchesters and people who need boundaries and need some stop trying to die for each other for 5 minutes. Okay. Anyway, you just want to reach through your TV and shake them. But I think unfortunately, part of why so many women or non-binary folks or folks from marginalized statuses love things like Winchesters is that we've been socialized to do that. We've been socialized to put ourselves last and to not consider our own needs. And that is not good for us or for the communities we're trying to serve. So we want you to put yourself back in it. And we also want you to know one thing that surprised me was to think about that you need other people. You need that power of community. It's the networking and the groups and people with many different skills coming together that really, really accomplish work. So one person, as wonderful as they cannot do it alone. You need other people. And I love I've been thinking a lot about D&D lately and how parties, right? You've got to have this person with this skill and this person with this skill and this skill. And you all have to team up and work together to accomplish that goal. And the other thing I love about parties and D&D and the kind of coming back to the self-care point is there's time built into campaigns to rest. If you've played D&D, I think there's like 10 minutes where everybody's just sitting there and your players or your characters are having like 8 hours of sleep or whatever. And I just think how funny, how prescient was it that they wrote that into a game to kind of remind people, okay, take a pause, check in with yourself, check in with your group. Are we okay? What's going on with us? What do we need to change? What's working, right? What's not? So those were surprising things. I think also just the amount of work that fans are doing and the ways that they're doing it, so creative and so inspiring. I was thinking about Kaela having looked into fans of the true crime podcasts, actually having contributed to helping get through some of the sexual assault kit backlog. So things like that where fans, it's kind of coming full circle. The loop is closing where folks find something inspiring and then they realize, oh, I can actually do something about this. They do the thing and then that actually helps the issue right? That's all we could kind of hope for in some ways with activism.
One of the things that I've also seen, which is maybe more of a quiet activism, but particularly in the transformative works and the fan works like fan fiction, so much representation written into the stories, and that can be LGBTQ, that can be trans, that can be non-binary, gender fluid, reimagining the characters, seeing the characters through a new lens. But there's also a long history in fan works of um, dealing with character has leukemia, character has cancer, character is dealing with mental illness. And in dealing with it through the story, through the power of story, through the lens of the character, there's a real healing potential there. And this is one of those things that is a kind of quiet activism, it seems to me, that not only increases the representation and therefore the inclusion, but it helps people understand some of those issues better than they may have before they read the story, to go, oh, I didn't realize that was a part of that. And because they're already fond of the characters, fond of the story, there's a real chance to broaden horizons and open minds and teach people things that they didn't know before that can change how they view the outside world.
Well, and I think there's something really cool about that with some of these more enduring fandoms like Supernatural or Star Wars or Star Trek or Xena, things that have been around for quite a while, for more than just a few years, where I agree with you, it starts out as quiet and it changes so much over time. I mean, even just the difference from when I first started getting into fandom research, we talked about certain things in fandom as having sort of Fight Club rules. You didn't talk about it. And now I go to conventions and those things are talked about, and they're talked about openly. And a lot of that actually has to do with LGBTQ plus representation. And it is a totally different world. I was giving a presentation recently on, and I won't go too much into shipping, but was giving a presentation on shipping and talking about a convention in 2011, and then just reflecting on what it was like to be at a similar convention in 2023. And it was night and day. They were not the same experience at all. And it's because that quiet piece got louder and louder. It started out as this rumble that just got bigger over time.
Well, I mean, for me, I was very moved by Jared's Always Keep Fighting campaign. And we had a panel at a convention, that genre convention, not a supernatural convention, but it was talking about, I think, depression in fantasy characters. And the panel went over and nobody wanted to leave and nobody wanted to end the panel. And I kind of looked at it and said, I don't know actors, I don't know TV people, but I sure know a whole lot of authors, and we all deal with these issues. What if we wrote essays about how mental illness and issues have shaped us, our worlds, and our characters? And that was the Hold On to the Light campaign. And I got over 150 authors from around the globe to write amazingly candid stories. But the idea was that by telling the story and owning it, it makes it much easier for fans to say, yeah, that's me too. Hey, that's my favorite author up there saying this. It's okay if I have it too, if I'm dealing with that too. And that's just a little tiny corner. That's not a very big thing at all. But to be able to be motivated to do that because of seeing all of this other stuff going on in the supernatural fandom and going, well, hey, I can't do that, but I can do this. And that seems to be exactly what you're talking about. People who said,
Yeah.
I want to do something. What if I did this?
It's exactly what we're talking about. And thank you for doing that. And you are probably affecting people and helping people in ways you are not aware. Like, the thing about this is like ripples. We don't know how far out but we can't see the edge of the pond or the lake or whatever. I'm from the Midwest, so it's going to be water metaphors. And I appreciate that. I wanted to add two things. One is to shout out to Lynn Zabernis and Kathy Larson in their book. Is it Fandom at the Crossroads? That's more academic, or is it it's Fandom at the Crossroads, or is it Fangasm? They had two. One's a little more.
Is the academic.
Okay, they go into this very theory of fan fiction as almost like a group therapy where someone is kind of in fiction processing issues that either have happened to them or perhaps that has happened to someone close to them, and they're processing that, and then the responses to that can be a really important healing process for both them and to people who read that. And so I remember reading that and that just kind of blowing my mind because I thought, okay, this makes sense now why we see dark fic, why we see themes in fic that are, there's stuff I don't read because it's just too upsetting to me, but this is why we have tags, right? And that respect culture. And then Kaela kind of sharing how that has become more and more mainstream. And I think also you and your collaborators modeling that everyone has challenges, right? And that's what's so important about what Jared has done too, I think, is to show not only can you be successful and have issues, you can show vulnerability that you have that, and you can show that you can be highly, uh, capable and functional in many areas of your life and still have mental health challenges in other areas. So I'm not trying to overemphasize functionality because there's times in my life when I've been depressed or anxious to this extent that I was not able to function in certain aspects. But then in other times in my life, that has been going on in the background, and it's just something happening in the background, and I'm still able to be mostly functional in another area. And so, whenever possible, when I feel safe, I usually disclose to students that I do have certain disabilities that are not visible, and that some of those fall under the mental health category because they are also struggling with that. And I think it's important that they know I am going to be sympathetic and respectful of that, and that you can be highly successful and professional and still have these things be a part of your identity.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and you mentioned fanfic as a form of therapy. I do want to give a shout out to Janina Scarlett's books about using fan fiction in therapy as a way to get people to be comfortable talking about their issues. We have a whole supernatural academics track of panels we've done for Continual where Lynn's been part of that, and some of our other folks who are psychologists and we go into things like obsession and children of alcoholics and loss and grief, and using the model of the show and the Winchesters to kind of talk about what's healthy, what's not healthy. Usually what the show did was not healthy, but that's okay. It's a good example. But being able to point to the show and the characters that we love and say that's what I'm going through is so much easier than having to come up with the words from scratch. And when you have that bond with a counselor or a therapist who can speak your language, your fandom language, that cuts so many corners off having to explain yourself. So something that seems so recreational as fandom really has very deep roots in who we are and how we see ourselves. And that translates then into activism.
For sure. I think and sometimes we don't know we're struggling with something until we see it, or we discover things about ourselves, kind of our subconscious. Forgive me, psychologists, or something draws us to this media. I might be using it incorrectly. And then we watch it and we go, oh my gosh, now I understand why I'm connecting so much to this person or this experience they're going through. Right. And that was a real wake up call for me personally in several different areas. But I also realized I have really unrealistic expectations for myself as a human person, because there was an episode of Xena in episode 2 where she like literally invents a cesarean section, a tracheotomy, and some other medical procedure all in like 10 minutes. And I thought, this is why I think I can do everything. And I need to take my own advice and step back and go, yeah, we're not Xena. We don't have to be Xena all the time.
But it comes back to me a lot of times with we're watching heroes, and to some extent heroes have fallen out of popularity in a lot of pop culture. We see so many anti-heroes, we see so many people that we don't want to aspire to, but no matter how screwed up we are, we can go, at least I'm better than that character. where heroes make us want to be better than we are, make us want to step up, make us want to maybe not save the world, but can I save that dog over there? Can I help my neighbor? And that's what drew me to fandom in the first place was I'll never be a hero like Sam and Dean Winchester, but maybe I can do a little something that makes it a little better. What do you think about that hero aspect when it comes to activism?
I think the hero aspect is really important, partly because of the identity piece, so that being able to see yourself in characters when you are having those tougher times can be a way to work through something. So, for example, there's a scene in Supernatural where there's a close up on Dean and he's trying to sort of smile through something that is very difficult. And he's been kind of given this lecture about putting this brave face back on. And it's not this like sweep it under the rug, don't deal with it necessarily that he's been used to. It's you do have work to do. And like, yeah, you get to grieve, but you don't get to do this in this like soul sucking way forever. And that's something that I've personally, in moments where I'm like, I don't know if I can keep doing it, been able to come back to. And to that more collectivistic piece of fandom, Tanya, when you were talking earlier about your own struggles, I think one of the things that's been really powerful about our work together is that we've been really transparent with one another about where those struggles are for each other, and being able to, if you're having a hard time, I can pick up some more stuff. If I'm having a hard time, you can pick up some more stuff. And that we've been able to have that exchange. And with the identity exploration pieces as well, one of the things that we talk about in the book and try to emphasize a lot on panels is that just existing as a person who does this kind of work is a radical act, whether you're doing the biggest thing or not. Just existing as a human in a way that is resistant to anything that is, anti-LGBTQ plus, anti, any of the things, that in and of itself gets to be a radical act.
Yeah, I think that we want to look to heroes in the same way that we kind of look to important leaders. Like, we'd love you to come in and just fix everything. But the reality is that's not the case. Even those, famous leaders have teams of folks and whole groups supporting the initiatives. So it's important. And that's what we were also trying to show in this, that look, well, this person's getting a lot of attention and that's great. There's these other 500 people here that are really making this happen, and they're supporting this change that we want to see. So I think that's important. Heroes are interesting though, because I think we also need them in an archetypical way to motivate us and to help us see what is the potential here. What should I do here? What are my obligations as a citizen and as a member of the human community? Like, where do I align on these various moral and ethical issues, I think is important to think about. Mentioning the whole, we can be honest with each other. We were working on an article that we're very excited about, that is about Stormfront in The Boys and about, that character. And I had this idea and I had sort of signed us up for this. I think this is how it goes. Usually I sign us up and then I say, hey, Kaela, can you do that? But I got COVID and we had the draft due, and luckily I was able to say to Kaela, I'm better, but I'm still in that brain fog mode. And is it possible for you to kind of pick this one up and run with it? And they did. And thank goodness for that, because, but I felt through everything we've been through, I could say that really honestly, I am just not in a place where someone I didn't have that relationship with, I might not be that open. I might just kind of try to push through it or something, but I could at least tell them, this is what's going on with me. It's not that my heart isn't there. It's that I've got this real limitation at this point. But yeah.
So what is chaotic good? I'm used to that term from D&D, but how are you using it? And what do you mean by it?
Yeah, good question. I think of it as sort of things like Gish, or the ways that activism can, as Kaela said, sometimes just existing is a radical act. But I would say it's really the creative, feistiness that fans bring to everything they do. It's the passion behind, I'm going to argue with you about this little tiny part of this episode for 20 minutes. But then we're going to kind of come together and respect each other, right? And work through it. Like, that dialogue really takes us to new places. So I think chaotic good is finding creative solutions to improving your world, whatever that would be, looking at something in a different way, seeing how to use what you have in a way that you never would have thought of. And I'm thinking here of Gish in terms of, seeing the submissions and seeing how people complete these items and what they come up with and the way that they're able to leverage their networks to do so. That is, in a nutshell, kind of what we're, I think, trying to capture with that term.
Okay.
Yeah. To spin it into some psych language, it's like we're talking about the way that fandom can create some cognitive flexibility. So when we think about people who are really resilient or groups who are really resilient, there's this whole body of work on resilience and the power of resilience in helping people work through trauma and helping people be able to sustain for activism. And the way you build resilience is through that cognitive flexibility, being able to see a challenge and say, okay, how am I going to do this differently, instead of just sitting down and letting the roadblock be there. And things like Gish, I think, are really powerful in creating some of that cognitive flexibility, because they are fun. They are weird. I've watched somebody spend hours trying to figure out how to get sugar cubes to stick together, and they didn't give up when one glue didn't work. They tried something else, and we kept trying to figure something out. As a psychotherapist, that is like my dream for everyone that I work with, is when the social challenge or the personal challenge arises, do you just sit down and let it happen to you, or do you figure out another way around? We can all recognize it's unjust that it's happening, especially when we're talking about things like minority stress. It's unjust that it's happening. We shouldn't have to do activism. And that ability to find a way around it, and especially through fandom, find a fun and creative way around it, builds so much more resilience.
And I
Okay.
think you're seeing examples of that. And not to get too political, I'm just going to use this as an example, if that's all right. Like, looking at activists who want to change legislation that isn't moving anywhere at the national level. So I'm thinking specifically, I heard a report today about activists who want to prevent mass shootings, right? Or want to enact more gun control. Wherever you stand on that, I'm just using it as an example. Because they're aware that at the national level, this is not going to move, the lever's not going to move on this issue. They're starting to go more strategically at local and state areas to like enact change at that level. And I think that's an interesting workaround, or the way that some doctors are now approaching gun violence as a public health, using more of a public health approach to gun violence, as opposed to trying to change things legislatively when we're kind of gridlocked in that area. So I think that's sort of the creativity that I see in fans too.
Well, folks, this has been fantastic, and there's a whole lot more, an infinite amount more to talk about, but we're out of time. So I want to thank you very much for your time, but please tell us where people can find you online. And again, remind us about the details of how to find your book. Kaela?
I'm actually going to punt to Tanya on that, because Tanya does all of our social media.
All of our one social media. No, you can find us mostly on Twitter at AK Nerd Fighting. So it's capital A, capital K, capital N, capital F, AK Nerd Fighting. We're pretty findable there. We also have a Medium account where we occasionally write some blog posts, and that's Always Keep Nerd Fighting, and also on Facebook, Always Keep Nerd Fighting. And I'm pretty findable. If you just search Tanya Cook, you'll probably find me. I'll probably be in a costume. I don't know, but
Okay. And the book.
yeah, the book Fandom Acts of Kindness is out now, and it's paperback. It's available kind of wherever you would buy books. If you go to your brick and mortar bookstore, you might have to ask them to order it for you, but it is available on Amazon, on bookshop.org, tattered cover. Powell's, and also please politely harass your local library to carry it, because I think that their acquisitions and things, their collection needs, the requests need to come from patrons. So we would love to see it in libraries as well.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for sharing your time with us. And thanks to all of you for watching and listening. There will be more Supernatural coming up here on Continual. So we'll see you online.